characters, what's most important is their personality. And how to get that personality is much of the way is through timing, you know. In Luxo Jr., for instance, he does a certain hop, and he hops throughout the film. Yet at one point, he's very happy, and he's hopping along. And the timing of the hop really defined pretty much the fact that he was happy. You know, the actual physical hop was about the same, because there's kind of a physical, you know, trying to get the base off the ground and it lands. But there was very little time in between the hops. So it's almost he would start the next hop right away, and he was looking ahead, and his whole focus was on this ball that he was trying to chase. But then there was a point after he had popped the ball that he's very sad, and his head was down, and when he started to hop, there was a lot of time in between the hops, you know, and he was just looking down, and he was basically hopping off to nowhere. You know, he was very, and just those subtle changes really gave the feeling like he was happy and he was sad. Because a rule of thumb is that a character would do the same action differently in two different emotional states. There's been a lot of talk in the media about computer animation taking over from traditional animation, from hand-drawn animation. And I think that's ridiculous because, you know, when computers come into any new industry, people are worried about computers replacing jobs. And in fact, granted, in factory jobs and so on, computers have done, you know, replaced whole areas that the humans used to do. But in animation, it's different. Computer animation is something very different than hand-drawn animation. When I first started working with computer animation, coming from traditional animation, I realized that the easiest thing to do with hand-drawn animation was the most difficult thing to do with computer animation, and vice versa, that one of the most difficult things to do with hand-drawn animation you could do almost very easily with computer. And so it seemed like a very natural way to use the two, either separately or together. For instance, in traditional animation, you know, when you animate characters, like in Disney animation, the dwarfs are a great example. They are so squishy. The dwarfs in Snow White, they're so squishy and animated, and you know, they're so flexible. Yet you feel like that they have some solidity to them to a certain extent. Well, to try to get that in computer animation is very difficult because, you know, you have to. The computer animation likes geometric shapes. They like things to be perfect, and you start bending that around while retaining the same volume and stuff gets to be very difficult. And the facial animation is very difficult. But but the computer does like geometric shapes, and you can move around. You can build a whole set and move in and around it, and everything stays like perfect as far as the perspective goes, and the shading and lighting and everything. It's perfect. And in Red's Dream, you know, the sort of the beginning and the end, where the bike shops, things look almost real. You know, it's sort of and the complexity and detail of that was very important. In the beginning, I always thought, well, the character animation should stay with hand-drawn animation, and the computer can do the backgrounds. And then it wasn't until I started working with Lucasfilm that they challenged me to say, well, let's try to do some character animation with a computer. And at first I said, no, it can't work. And they said, no, well, let's try, you know. Yeah, I dare you, they said, you know. So we experimented, and I realized that certain characters you can do quite well. In computer animation, you really need to know a lot of the same things that a traditional animator needs to know. When I first started working with computer animation, most computer animation was being done by the scientists who actually created the programs. And while the work was interesting, it had sort of a, you know, the creativity in the images and the animation wasn't very exciting. It was, I look at it as saying it's like all the paintings in the world being done by the chemists who mix the paint. You know, it just doesn't have quite the artistic vision, you might say. And so when I started working with the medium, what I brought to the medium of computer animation was a knowledge of traditional animation principles and techniques and things that I learned at Disney and at Cal Arts. And we started doing character animation, you know, with like Luxo Jr. or Redstream. And people would come to me and say, like, how did you do that? You know, what kind of, you know, amazing new tools do you have? And I said, I have the same kind of tools that you have. I just, you know, sort of have an understanding of how to use them. When I started working with, at Lucasfilm, which the group became Pixar, I started working with my colleagues, Bill and Evan. They were, they tended to be kind of purists in a way, in wanting to do things so that, you know, if it was a wood grain, it would be real wood grain, you know, or if it, you know, if it had a reflection of something, they wanted it to be the true reflection and all. And as you know, in traditional animation is just one series, one cheat after another. It's just a series of cheats, you know, to get it to kind of the way you want it to look. And so I started suggesting, you know, why don't we do kind of, you know, experiment and, you know, make it do this, do that. And they were like kind of reluctant at first, but then when they saw how it started turning out, they liked it. In fact, in Tin Toy, here's an example, is that we wanted to get the feeling that the toy, at least the body of him, was enamel paint, you know, like, you know, how a tin toy is basically tin painted with a shiny enamel. And it's just one of the shiniest things you can imagine. And especially this toy was supposed to be new, so we wanted to even more. And so we started putting, if you notice that it's being lit by sort of sunlight coming through this big window with lots of window panes, and we wanted to get, they started putting in the reflection. Something that would be very shiny, of course, would have the reflection of the window in there. And we put that in there, and it looked, and it didn't look quite right. I mean, the reflection was sort of odd. And so, you know, when you draw, and hand draw, and cartooning, if you draw a balloon, right, the typical highlight you put is like a little window, you know, a little reflection of a window, you know, 4 panes. And so I had them program that in. And so on the body here, you can see it here a little bit. It's just one of that cartoon reflection. And no one ever questioned it. You know, it just made it look so glossy and new that no one ever thought, you know, looked at it or thought of it. So when you see it, you can actually see this, just a little cartoon highlight. But then also in computer animation, every surface of your character, you have to define, you know, how shiny you want it to be or what color, so on. And we wanted to contrast the, you know, the shininess of this part of the character with, like, the mallet is like a plastic, you know. So we have that, you see that it does not have that little window highlight, it just has sort of a plastic highlight on there. Tin Toy was inspired, the whole film was inspired from some home videos that my sister took of my nephew when he was young. It just amazed me to see, like, a 7-month-old sitting there with his toys. What my sister did is sat him down on his favorite blanket, put all of his favorite toys around, and she filmed like a half an hour straight, not moving the camera, and it was great. I mean, the way you could just see the struggle of trying to get his hand to reach for something that was just out of his reach and how he would get frustrated. And of course, everything he got in his hand immediately went to his mouth and so on. So I was so inspired from that, I thought, I have to animate a baby. You know, I know it'll be hard, but I have to animate a baby. And so I started collecting home video of friends of mine, family and friends of babies. I ended up with like 8 or 9 hours of home video. I mean, typically you go over to someone's house and they say, hey, you want to see some home video of my kid? And it's like the worst torture you can imagine. I was the opposite. I kept going over, got any videotapes? You got it? Let me borrow them. Let me dub them. You know. And so it was very inspirational. In fact, in Tin Toy, at one point the baby is sort of playing with the toys, and then he just stops dead. Kind of stares, and the audience is wondering what's happening, and all of a sudden, and it just cracked me up. I was sitting alone in my workroom, and I said, I have to use that. That's great. Our latest film, called Knick Knack, was something that was we wanted to do more of like a Chuck Jones, like Warner Brothers cartoon. So I said, okay, it's computer generated. So what? Let's not try to, make people think it's real. It's computer generated. It's, we don't need to worry about all these things that we worried about for, like intersections and proper shadows and so on and so forth. Because I wanted to do a cartoon, something much more cartoony. And so the storyline is very, very much like a Warner Brothers cartoon. It has a lot of like ridiculous gags that build on each other. And it was really fun. It's probably the funnest film that we've created. I'm a big fan of the Warner Brothers cartoons, especially the work of Chuck Jones. I think he is, timing-wise, he's the best there is. His films are just brilliant as far as the timing goes. And I get a tremendous amount of inspiration from his work. I've studied it quite a bit, all of his films, and I mean, it's great to consider watching cartoons as, study, Yeah, I think I'll go watch some Roadrunner and, do a little study. My 9-year-old boy, he studies cartoons with me all the time. Hey, Dad, let's watch Roadrunner now. Okay, so, but what's great about those films is that, in a sense, many of them have almost the same gags over and over, but they're varied because of the timing, and the distinct personalities of the characters. Many times are told without words, and just the way the character moves and all. But most importantly, I think, is the timing of his gags, the humor that comes out. He just lets something go long enough, and the finesse of the animation, is really great.